Africa is often spoken about as if it were a single country, a single story, or a single crisis. But Africa is a continent of immense scale, diversity, and historical weight. It is the world's second-largest continent after Asia, covering about 30.3 million square kilometers, including nearby islands. That means roughly one-fifth of all land on Earth is African land. It is also the second most populous continent, home to nearly 1.4 billion people, with thousands of communities, languages, landscapes, and cultural traditions. To understand Africa, we have to move beyond simple headlines. This is a continent that holds deserts, rainforests, savannas, megacities, ancient kingdoms, island nations, and some of the youngest populations on the planet. It is both the birthplace of humanity and one of the key arenas where the future of the world will be shaped. Geographically, Africa sits in a unique position. It straddles both the equator and the prime meridian, placing it across the northern, southern, eastern, and western hemispheres. To the north lies the Mediterranean Sea, linking Africa to Europe and the Middle East. To the west is the Atlantic Ocean, to the southeast the Indian Ocean, and to the northeast the region connects toward the Arabian Plate and the Gulf of Aqaba. This location has made Africa a crossroads for trade, migration, religion, and empire for thousands of years. Its coastline faces multiple worlds at once: Europe across the Mediterranean, Arabia and Asia through the Red Sea and Indian Ocean, and the Americas across the Atlantic. Africa is not isolated on the map. It is deeply connected to the movement of people, goods, ideas, and power throughout world history. Africa's political map is just as complex as its geography. The continent contains 54 fully recognized sovereign states, making it one of the most politically diverse regions in the world. Algeria is the largest African country by area, stretching across a huge portion of North Africa and the Sahara. Nigeria is the largest by population, with a population so large and dynamic that it plays a major role in Africa's economy, culture, and politics. Africa also includes Madagascar, one of the world's largest islands, along with many archipelagos and islands. Some territories on African geographical soil are governed by non-African states, mostly as islands connected historically to European or Middle Eastern powers. This complexity reflects Africa's long layers of indigenous state formation, trade connections, colonization, and modern diplomacy. One of Africa's most important realities is its population. Africa has the youngest population of any continent. In 2012, its median age was about 19.7 years, compared with a global median of about 30.4. That youthfulness is not just a statistic, it shapes schools, labor markets, politics, cities, technology, and culture. A young population can create enormous opportunities if education, infrastructure, healthcare, and jobs expand with it. It can also create pressure if economies cannot provide enough pathways for young people. Projections for 2024 suggest Africa's population may exceed 3.8 billion by 2100. If that happens, Africa will become even more central to the global future. The continent's young people will influence migration, innovation, entrepreneurship, climate adaptation, urban growth, and international politics. Africa is often described through poverty, but that framing is incomplete. It is true that Africa is the least wealthy inhabited continent per person, and it ranks low in total wealth compared with larger global economies. Scholars have connected this to many overlapping causes, including geography, climate, corruption, colonial rule, Cold War politics, and neo-colonial economic relationships. But none of these factors alone explains the continent's economic situation. Colonial systems were designed largely for extraction, not balanced development. Many African economies inherited borders, infrastructure, and institutions shaped around exporting raw materials rather than building integrated domestic markets. At the same time, Africa is home to some of the world's fastest-growing economies. The economic story is therefore not simply decline or underdevelopment. It is a story of constraint, resilience, uneven growth, and enormous potential. Africa's natural environment is among the richest on Earth. The continent is highly biodiverse and has the largest number of megafauna species in the world. Elephants, giraffes, rhinoceroses, hippos, lions, and many other large animals remain deeply associated with African landscapes. One reason Africa retained so much megafauna is that it was less affected than other continents by the extinction of large animals during the Pleistocene. But Africa's environments are not only savannas. The continent includes the Sahara, the largest hot desert in the world, the Congo Basin rainforests, high mountain systems, wetlands, river valleys, and coral-rich coastlines. This biodiversity supports ecosystems, tourism, local livelihoods, cultural traditions, and scientific understanding. Africa's natural wealth is not a backdrop to human history. It has shaped settlement, agriculture, trade, conflict, and adaptation for millennia. Yet Africa is also one of the most environmentally vulnerable regions in the world. Desertification threatens land where people depend on farming and herding. Deforestation damages habitats and can disrupt rainfall, soil stability, and local economies. Water scarcity is a growing concern in many regions, especially as populations rise and climate patterns become less predictable. Pollution affects cities, rivers, coasts, and public health. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has identified Africa as the continent most vulnerable to climate change. This vulnerability does not mean Africans have contributed most to the problem. In fact, many African countries have historically emitted far less greenhouse gas than industrialized regions. The danger lies in exposure and limited resources for adaptation. Climate change may intensify droughts, floods, food insecurity, disease risks, and displacement. Africa is widely accepted as the place of origin of humans and the broader hominid family, especially Eastern Africa. Fossil evidence places early hominids and their ancestors at around 7 million years ago. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, are believed to have originated in Africa roughly 350,000 to 260,000 years ago. This makes Africa not just one continent among many, but the deep ancestral homeland of every human being alive today. Before there were nations, empires, writing systems, or cities, there were human communities adapting to African environments, developing tools, language, cooperation, and culture. The story of Africa is therefore inseparable from the story of humanity itself. When we study Africa's past, we are not studying a distant or separate history. We are looking at the earliest chapters of all human history. Africa's historical civilizations were varied, powerful, and often underrepresented in global education. Ancient Egypt rose along the Nile and became one of the most influential civilizations in world history. But Africa's history did not begin and end there. The continent saw the rise and fall of kingdoms and empires such as Makuria, the Fatimids, Mali, the Asante, Congo, the Luba, Bunyoro, Great Zimbabwe, Imarina, and the Zulu. These societies built trade networks, armies, religious institutions, diplomatic systems, cities, and artistic traditions. Some were centralized states, while others were more decentralized or hierarchical, meaning authority was distributed in ways that do not fit neatly into modern state models. African political history is not a simple march from tribe to nation. It includes empires, city-states, stateless societies, federations, kingdoms, and complex local systems. One reason Africa's history has often been misunderstood is that many African societies preserved knowledge through oral tradition. In these communities, the spoken word was not casual or inferior to writing. It was a respected system for transmitting law, genealogy, history, morality, and cultural memory. Storytellers, elders, praise singers, and historians carried information across generations. Anthropologists have sometimes described such societies as oral civilizations, in contrast to literate civilizations that center written documents. But oral does not mean ahistorical. It means history was stored, performed, verified, and renewed in different ways. African culture also remains extraordinarily rich across regions, including art, cuisine, music, dance, religion, and dress. From West African rhythms to Ethiopian liturgical traditions, from Swahili coastal culture to Southern African beadwork, the continent contains many cultural worlds, not one. Africa was also deeply affected by slavery, colonialism, and global power struggles. Slave trades created large African diasporas, especially in the Americas, where African people and their descendants shaped music, religion, language, agriculture, resistance movements, and national cultures. Later, from the late 19th to the early 20th century, most of Africa was rapidly conquered and colonized by European powers during an era driven by industrial expansion and competition. Ethiopia and Liberia were major exceptions to direct colonization. European rule reorganized economies toward extraction, taking natural resources and labor to serve outside interests. Colonial borders often cut across older political, ethnic, and economic landscapes. The effects were not temporary. They influenced modern states, infrastructure, education systems, languages of administration, land ownership, and patterns of inequality that many countries still navigate today. After World War II, decolonization transformed Africa's political landscape. Many present-day African states emerged during this period, gaining independence from European rule and attempting to build new governments under difficult conditions. In 1963, African countries established the Organization of African Unity, which later became the predecessor to the African Union. Today, the African Union is headquartered in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and represents efforts at continental cooperation, diplomacy, peacekeeping, and development. Newly independent countries generally chose to keep colonial borders, partly to avoid widespread border wars. But this meant that many states inherited boundaries that did not always reflect older cultural or political realities. Traditional power structures continued to influence governance in varying degrees. Modern Africa is therefore shaped by both inherited borders and local histories that long predate those borders. Africa's future matters to the entire world. Its population is growing rapidly, its cities are expanding, and its economies include both serious challenges and major growth stories. Its biodiversity is globally significant, but its ecosystems face intensifying climate pressure. Its history is foundational to humanity, yet still too often simplified or ignored. To understand Africa, we need to hold multiple truths at once: wealth and poverty, vulnerability and resilience, ancient heritage and youthful energy, local diversity, and continental cooperation. Africa is not a problem to be solved from the outside, nor a single narrative of tragedy or promise. It is a vast, dynamic continent whose people, environments, and histories have shaped the world for hundreds of thousands of years. And in the 21st century, Africa will continue shaping what comes next. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.